Beaten crippled at 12 and cast out at 15. A cowboy built her a chair and gave her a window. The chair came first. That's what people always get wrong when they tell this story. They like to start with her, the way she looked, or the cold, or the way I found her at the edge of my property in November with nothing but a canvas sack and a piece of wood she used as a crutch. They want to start there because it's a cleaner picture. Man finds girl. Man helps girl. It gives everything a shape they can hold. But the chair came first, 3 weeks before I ever laid eyes on her, 3 weeks before any of this. I need you to understand that. I'd been building it for my own reasons, reasons that don't matter anymore, or maybe matter so much I still can't say them plainly. I'll try. My wife, Celeste, had died the spring before, not slow, not the way you expect it, not wasting away in a bed while you sit there holding her hand and saying all the things you should have said 10 years earlier. She was here one morning and gone the afternoon of the same day. Heart, the doc in Dalhart said, just the heart, like that explained it, like that gave you somewhere to put the weight of it. We'd been married 19 years. I was 43 when she died. She'd had a bad hip since her 30s, a fall from a horse when she was young, and I had built her things over the years. A low step to get into the wagon, a handle bar on the side of the bathtub. Little things a man makes with his hands when he can't fix the thing that actually needs fixing. That's what I do with grief. I always have. I make something. When my father died, I built a new fence line for 6 days straight, dug every post myself until my shoulders locked and I couldn't raise my arms. When my brother Harlan rode off to the war and didn't come back, I built a barn, 60 feet by 40. Took me 4 months alone. So when Celeste died eventually, after the drinking, after the long, useless weeks of sitting in her chair in the evenings because I didn't know where else to sit, I started building a wheelchair. The kind she'd never let me build for her while she was alive. She was stubborn about it, said the crutch was fine, said she didn't want to be seen as an invalid. I understood it, or I tried to. But I always thought if I'd built it sooner, she might have moved around more. Might have got outside more. Might have had more of what little good there was. So I built it. In November, 3 weeks before I found the girl. I built it in the barn in the evenings after the day's work was done, with a lantern hung from the center beam and the smell of fresh-cut pine and the horses shifting in their stalls. I built it careful. Solid spoked wheels with iron rims I had a smith in Amarillo make to my spec. A seat with a curved back, shaped so a person could sit in it for hours without their spine screaming. Armrests padded with leather I'd cured myself. Footrests that could be folded flat. I built it the way I build everything, slow, precise, checking the joints twice, never rushing the dry time on the glue. I didn't know what I was going to do with it when it was done. That's the honest answer. I just needed to build it. It was finished on the 14th of November. I remember because there was a hard frost that night and the iron rims had sweated in the cold, and I wiped them down with an oil rag before I covered the chair with a canvas tarp. I stood there a minute looking at the shape of it under the canvas. Then I blew out the lantern and went inside. 3 weeks later, she was on my property line. Her name was Nora Vass. I didn't know that right away. The first thing I knew was that it was 5 in the morning and my dog, an old red heeler named Duff, was raising a sound I'd never heard from him before. Not barking, Duff was a barker, had been his whole life, would bark at a windmill if the mood struck him. This was different, low and steady. The kind of sound a dog makes when it's worried, not angry. I came off the porch in my boots and coat with my rifle and the lantern. It was still full dark, the sky just beginning to go gray in the east, maybe 15 degrees out, and there was a skim of new snow on the ground that made everything show up sharper than it should at that hour. Duff had gone out toward the south fence line, the one that borders the old Calder Road, and I followed him. She was sitting against a fence post. Not lying, sitting, like she'd made a decision about it. Her back was straight against the post, and her legs were out in front of her, and her hands were in her lap, and she was looking straight ahead into the dark. She had on a man's coat, too big wool, and a hat that had seen better days, and she was holding onto a piece of hickory, not carved, just a branch about 4 feet long, stripped of bark. The canvas sack was beside her in the snow. She looked up when the lantern light hit her. She didn't flinch. That was the first thing I noticed. Most people flinch when you come up on them in the dark with a light. She just looked at me, level and steady, and waited. "You all right?" I said. "I'm cold," she said, "but I'm not dying." I stood there a moment. She looked about 17, maybe 18. Hard to say. Her face was thin, and the cold had put red into her cheeks, and there were dark circles under her eyes that said she hadn't slept, maybe not in a day or more. Can you walk? I said. She looked at me a moment, and something moved across her face, not shame exactly. More like she was deciding whether I was worth explaining it to. Not the way you mean, she said. Duff had settled down beside her by then, pressed against her leg. She had one hand on his back without really noticing she'd put it there. I looked at her legs. Even under the coat, I could see the way they sat wrong. The left one especially bent at an angle that said the bone had healed the way God left it, not the way a doctor would have said it. I didn't ask about it then. I crouched down and picked up her canvas sack and stood back up. There's a house 30 yards north, I said. I can carry you or I can get something to wheel you in. Your call. She looked at me. Those eyes were brown, dark brown, and they were taking me in the way a person does when they're measuring whether to trust, and I understood it. A man alone, early morning, no one around for miles. I stood still and let her look. How far is the next town? She said. 14 miles. Can I borrow your horse? In the morning, I said, when it's light and you've had something hot. She thought about it another moment. Then she said, I'll take the carry. I set her on the kitchen bench beside the stove and put wood on the fire and put water on for coffee. She didn't say much. She held the hickory branch across her knees the way you hold something you've come to depend on, not gripping it, just keeping it where she knew it was. I made eggs and bread and she ate without being asked, and without saying thank you, and without any of the self-conscious embarrassment some people wear when they're hungry and eating someone else's food. She was just hungry. She ate. When she was done, she looked around the kitchen. It was still mostly the way Celeste had left it. The blue curtains at the window, the row of crockery on the shelf, the braided rug. You live alone, she said. Going on 9 months now. She didn't ask the obvious question. She just nodded like she understood that answer. I'm not looking for charity, she said. I've got a cousin in Tascosa. I just need to get there. All right, I said. I'll drive you when the roads are clear. Might be a day or two this snow. She looked at me again with that level look. Why? I poured the coffee and set hers in front of her and sat down across the table. Because it's 14 miles and you've got a hickory stick for a leg and it's 15 degrees out, I said. She looked down at her coffee. The right corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, not quite not. My name's Nora, she said. Calhoun, I said. Amos Calhoun. The road stayed closed 4 days. I gave her the spare room, the one at the back of the house with the east-facing window, the one that got the morning light. I brought in extra blankets and a wash basin, and I left her to it. She was self-sufficient about it in a way that made me think she'd had to be for a long time. She managed on her own. She didn't ask for help unless she needed it, and when she did ask, it was plain and direct, no apology attached to it. On the second day, she asked if she could have something to do. She said she couldn't sit still for 4 days without going half crazy. I asked what she could do. Mend, she said. Cook. I can work leather if you've got tools. I can read and write if you need letters drafted. I had a pile of harness leather that needed stitching. I set her up at the kitchen table with the tools and the leather and the wax thread and watched her take to it like she'd done it 100 times. She had. By noon, she'd done more work than I'd have done in 3 days. She talked some while she worked, and I listened. She didn't tell it all at once. It came out in pieces, over the 4 days, the way things do when a person is deciding how much of themselves to give to a stranger. Her father had beaten her when she was 12. That was how the legs happened. Not both at once, the left in the beating, the right later from a fall she took because the left hadn't healed right and gave way on her on a staircase. She said it so flat you almost missed what it meant. The way some people learn to say the worst things without color because color costs too much. Her mother had been dead since she was 9. After the beating, her father kept her because she could still work. She could still cook and mend and haul water on her knees if she had to, and she did. 3 years of it. Then, she said, he brought a new woman into the house, and the new woman didn't want a crippled girl underfoot, and she was put out at 15 with the canvas sack and the coat, and told to find her cousin in Tascosa. That was 2 weeks before I found her at my fence line, 2 weeks on the road. I didn't say anything when she told me. There isn't anything to say to that. I just kept working. I was at the bench by the window, fitting a new hinge to the pantry door, and I let the silence sit without trying to fill it, because filling it would have been for my benefit, not hers. She watched me work a while, Then she said, "You don't ask a lot of questions." "No," I said. "Most people ask a lot of questions. Most people want to hear themselves think." She was quiet. "Then that's about right." On the third day, I told her about the chair. I don't know why I told her then. I'd been thinking about it since the first morning. I'd carried her from the fence line and across the yard and up the porch steps, and I'd felt in her body the way she held herself, not limp, never limp, but the specific way a person holds themselves when they've learned not to trust that the floor will be there the way they expect it. Alert, always slightly braced. That first night before I went to bed, I'd gone out to the barn and stood in front of the chair under its tarp for a long time. I hadn't lifted the canvas. I just stood there. On the third day, I went out to the barn in the afternoon, and when I came back and I said, "There's something in the barn I'd like you to look at, if you want." She looked up from the leather work. "What is it?" "Easier to show you." I carried her out. She'd gotten matter-of-fact about that by the third day, no different than me carrying a crate, and set her on the bench just inside the barn door where it was out of the wind. The horses watched us. I went to the back and lifted the tarp. I wheeled it out to her. She looked at it for a long time without speaking. It was a good chair. I knew it was a good chair. The pine had gone golden from the lantern oil in the air, and the leather seat was smooth, and the wheels were true. I'd built it to last. "You made this," she said. "Yes." "For who?" I told her about Celeste. Not all of it, some of it. Enough. I told her about the hip and the crutch Celeste always preferred, and how I'd built this too late, and maybe it had been for me as much as for her. I said it because it was true, and because Nora Vass had spent 3 days not dressing her own story up, and it seemed right to return the favor. She reached out and put her hand on the armrest, ran her thumb along the curve of it where I'd shaped it with the draw knife. She wasn't testing it, not really. She was just feeling it, the way a person does when something has been made with actual care, and they're not used to seeing that aimed at them. "Can I try it?" she said. I helped her in, adjusted the footrests, stepped back. She gripped the wheels and moved herself forward 2 feet, then back. Then forward again, turning slightly to the right. Her face was doing something I don't have a clean word for, not happy, not exactly. Something more like a person who has been operating in a smaller space than they should have been and have just discovered the room is larger. She went to the barn door under her own power and looked out at the yard. The snow was still on the ground. The sky was the flat gray of late afternoon. She sat there a while. Then she said, without looking back at me, "Is the door to the spare room wide enough?" "I'll widen it tonight," I said. The roads cleared on the 4th day. She didn't ask me about Tascosa. I didn't bring it up. Something had shifted in those 4 days, not dramatically, not with any declaration, just the way a thing settles when it finds its right level. She was doing the harness work. I was doing the fence repairs and the feeding and the 100 other things a ranch demands in November. In the evening, she sat at the kitchen table, and I sat across from it, and sometimes we talked and sometimes we didn't, and the silence was the comfortable kind, the kind that doesn't need filling. On the 5th day, she said, "My cousin might not want me." I looked up from the account book I was going over. "What makes you say that?" "I haven't seen him in 6 years. He might have moved on. He might have a wife who thinks the same as my father's woman." She paused. She was looking at the window. Outside, the snow was melting off the roof in slow drops. "I don't know why I put so much stock in a cousin I barely know." "You needed somewhere to go," I said, "so you went toward the only name you had." She looked at me. "That's about what happened." I put down the pen. This is the part where a lesser man would have said something useless, like "it'll work out," or "I'm sure he'll be glad to see you." I've never been able to say things I don't know for true, so I said the thing I did know. "You can stay here," I said. "There's work. I'm not running charity. You'd earn your keep 3 times over. The room is yours as long as you want it." She looked at me for a while with those dark, level eyes. "Why?" she said, same word as the first morning. "Because you're the hardest worker I've seen in 10 years, I said, "and because the chair's in the barn and nobody's using it." The right corner of her mouth moved again. "That's a practical reason," she said. "I'm a practical man." She looked at the window again, the drip of snow melt off the eaves, then back at me. "All right," she said. "I want to be careful here, about what this was and what it wasn't." She was young, 18. As it turned out, her birthday was in December. I was 43. I want you to understand what I mean when I say she stayed, because I know how things can sound when a man tells a story, and I won't have it sound wrong. What happened over the next year was this. She worked, and I worked, and the ranch ran better than it had since before Celeste got sick. Nora had a mind for numbers I didn't have. She took over the accounts in the spring and found 2 places where I'd been overpaying for feed and 1 contract with a neighboring ranch that was costing me more than it was worth. She had opinions about the planting rotation, and some of them were right and some weren't, and we argued about it plainly, the way 2 people argue when they respect each other enough to disagree out loud. She learned the ranch. Not just the inside work, she could only do so much from the chair, but she figured out what she could reach and what she couldn't, and she never wasted time on the second kind. She drove the wagon herself after 2 months, had the reins and the brake figured out in a week. She went to town with me and without me. She was not a woman who needed protecting from the world. She needed what anyone needs, which is a fair chance and solid ground. I widened the spare room door that first night like I said I would. That spring I built a ramp off the back porch. In the summer I leveled a path from the house to the garden so the wheels didn't bog in the soft ground. I built a work table in the kitchen at chair height so she didn't have to reach up all the time. I didn't announce these things. I just built them. She didn't thank me for them with words. She used them and got on with the work, which was thanks enough. The town, for a while, had opinions. Dalhart wasn't a cruel place, but it was a small one, and small places notice things and talk about them, and what they noticed was a middle-aged widower and a young crippled woman sharing a house and a ranch, and driving to town together on Saturdays. There were looks. There was talk at the feed store that got back to me through a man named Cord Beaumont who I'd known since I was 20 and who told me straight what was being said. I told Cord to tell them it was none of their business. Cord said that wasn't likely to stop it. I said I knew that. I said it anyway. Nora knew about the talk. I didn't try to hide it from her. She said, "Does it bother you?" "Does it bother you?" I said. She thought about it. "It would bother me if it were true," she said. "Since it isn't, it mostly just annoys me." "Same," I said. She nodded, then we ignore it. "That was my plan," I said. The change happened in the second year, and it happened slowly enough that I didn't name it for a long time. I started noticing the sound of the chair in the house, not as a thing that required attention, just as a sound that meant the house was inhabited. The specific sound of those iron-rimmed wheels on the floorboards, slightly different in each room. The kitchen had a creak near the stove. The hall between her room and the main room had a softer sound, the boards being thicker there. The front room, where she liked to sit in the evenings near the good window, that was almost quiet, just a low roll. I noticed I listened for it when I came in from outside. The way you listen for something that tells you you're home. I didn't do anything about that for a long time. I thought about Celeste and whether it was too soon, and then I thought about what too soon even means after a year, and whether it means anything at all, and I didn't come to any conclusions. I just kept working, and she kept working, and the ranch kept running. In the fall of the second year, Nora got sick. Not seriously, as it turned out, a lung infection, the kind that makes you miserable for 2 weeks and then passes. But the first 3 days of it were bad. Fever, a deep wet cough, barely conscious. I sat up with her the first 2 nights because the fever was running high enough that I didn't want to leave her alone. The second night, around 3 in the morning, the fever broke. She came up out of it the way a person does, damp, exhausted, but clear-eyed. She looked at me sitting in the chair by her bed. "You've been here all night," she said. "Yes," I said. "Both nights?" "Yes." She looked at me for a long moment. "Nobody's done that before," she said, sat up for me. I didn't say anything. "My mother would have," she said, "but she died when I was 9, so." She turned her head toward the window. It was still dark, the stars showing above the tree line. "I used to think about what it would feel like," she said. "Having somebody in your corner, really in it, not just saying it." "What does it feel like?" I said. She was quiet a moment. Then she said, "Like I can breathe." I looked at my hands, the calloused knuckles, the scar on the left thumb from a chisel that slipped 10 years ago. Then I looked at her. "You should sleep," I said. "I know," she said, but she didn't close her eyes right away. She looked at me one more time the way she'd looked at me that first morning at the fence line, measuring, taking account. Then she said, "Thank you, Amos." Not Calhoun, Amos, it was the first time. Then she closed her eyes. The next spring, 1884, the last hard winter behind us. The grass coming back in that particular green it only is for about 3 weeks in April. I was out by the south fence, mending a section the winter ice had heaved. It was a warm day, warm enough to work without a coat, and I'd been at it a couple of hours when I heard the chair coming along the flat path Nora had taken to using from the back of the house to the garden area. Only she wasn't going to the garden. She stopped about 10 feet away and sat watching me work. I kept working, she sat there. This went on maybe 5 minutes. Then she said, "I've been thinking about something." "All right," I said. I was twisting wire, I kept at it. "I've been thinking about how most of my life I was told what I was worth and it was never much." She paused. "And then I landed on your property line and you just," she stopped, started again. "You built things for me. You built the ramp and the path and the table height, and you never said anything about it. You never made it a thing, you just built it." I finished the wire and moved to the next post. "I didn't expect that," she said. "I didn't know people did that." "You needed it," I said. "Other people needed things, and nobody built them anything." I didn't answer that because she was right, and there wasn't an argument to make. She came forward another few feet in the chair, close enough that I had to turn and look at her. "I want to stay here," she said. "Not because I don't have anywhere else to go, I do. I've had money saved for 8 months. I could go to Tascosa or Amarillo or anywhere, honestly. I want to stay because," she looked at me straight, "because I'd rather be here." I put down the wire roll. I looked at her. The morning light was on her face, and she was looking at me the way I'd never had anyone look at me, not since Celeste, and even then it was different. This was a different kind of direct, a looking at that had thought behind it, deliberate. "You're certain?" I said. "I'm certain," she said. "Are you?" I thought about the sound of the chair in the house. The way the ranch ran now, the accounts in order, the contract renegotiated, the work divided along sense rather than habit. I thought about the 2 nights by her bed and the sound of her breathing when the fever broke. I thought about her at the fence line in the dark before dawn with her back against the post and her legs out straight and her eyes level. "Yes," I said. She held out her hand. I took it. Her hand was rough, rougher than you might expect, rougher than mine in some places from the wheel rims. She'd never been a soft woman. She'd been made hard by people who should have protected her, and she'd come out the other side of that with something intact that ought not to have survived it. She was still holding my hand, and she was looking at me, and I could feel the grip of her, that particular grip that says I'm here, I mean this. "I love you," she said, "plain as you like, no decoration." I was 45 years old, and I'd been loved before, and I knew what it cost people to say that and mean it. I knew what it cost especially from a person who had been given every reason not to trust what the word meant. "I love you," I said. She held on. We married in June. Small. The preacher from the Methodist Church in Dalhart and Cord Beaumont as witness, and a woman named Hester McCree who had befriended Nora at the dry goods store and was the only person in town who had never seemed to find anything worth remarking on about our arrangement. The talk in town stopped mostly after the wedding. Some of it didn't, and that's the way of things. We didn't lose sleep over it. What I want to tell you about is the window. The spare room, her room, for that first year and more, had an east-facing window. The morning light came through it in a particular way, low and long, that lit the whole room up gold for about an hour after sunrise. That was why I'd put her in that room from the first night. I'd thought about it when I'd carried her in. She needed the light. It seemed important in a way I couldn't explain. About 6 months after we married, I started on the addition. A room off the east side of the house, bigger than the spare room, with a window on the east wall and a window on the south wall, and the south-facing one bigger than any window I'd put in a building before, 4 feet wide, 3 feet tall. Glass I had specially freighted from a supplier in Dallas because it was the clearest glass I could find. It took 3 months to build. When it was done, I brought Nora in and showed her. She sat in the middle of the room in the chair and looked at the south window. The afternoon sun was coming through, and it filled the room the way it only can when the glass is really clear. No bubbles, no waviness. She sat there a long time without saying anything. Then she said, "You built me a window." "I built you a room," I said. "The window was the point." She reached back and found my hand. "The chair and now a room," she said. You know, when you found me at that fence post, I thought best case is I get to the cousin in Tascosa and he doesn't turn me out. That was the best case I could imagine. What's the best case now? I said. She was quiet a moment, looking at the light coming through the south glass and spreading across the floor. This, she said, this is the best case. She kept my hand. I stood behind her in the room I'd built, and she sat in the chair I'd made for a woman I'd loved and lost, and the light came through the window, and I knew what it meant to be needed in the way that matters. Not the useful kind of needed, not the way a ranch hand is needed or a carpenter is needed, but the way a man is needed when a person who has every reason to trust no one has decided to trust him. That weight. I carried it then and I carry it now, and I wouldn't put it down for anything. The year after she had the baby, a girl, we named her Me. Me came out with her mother's level eyes and her father's big hands, a combination that made the doctor in Dalhart laugh when he remarked on it. She was healthy. Nora was more than healthy. She was something I don't have a word for, except to say that some people come into the fullest version of themselves through the hardest roads. And watching Nora hold me in that southlit room on the second morning was one of the 2 or 3 things in my life I won't try to describe. Me learned to walk before she learned to talk, the way children do, and the first place she walked to on her own was her mother's chair. She grabbed the armrest and looked up at Nora with the expression of someone who has just discovered they have legs, which is the expression of someone who doesn't yet know that the world is complicated, that legs are not enough, that a person needs more than that. Me didn't know any of that yet. She just knew she'd made it to the chair. Nora picked her up. There are things I'm not telling you. Not because they didn't happen, but because they're ours, and I'm enough of a private man that some things stay where they happened. What I'll tell you is this. I was a man who'd been alone so long that alone had started to feel like the natural condition of things. Not unhappy, I wasn't a man given to unhappiness. I'd built too much and worked too hard to have time for it, but alone. Without someone who saw the specific shape of me. That's a different thing from loneliness. Loneliness is wanting company. What I mean is more particular. Going years without someone who could look at you and see, not the ranch, not the work, not the useful functions, but the man himself. The actual person, whatever that amounts to. Celeste had seen me, and she'd gone, and I'd built a chair I had no use for, because when you've been seen by someone and then they're gone, you don't quite know what to do with your hands. Nora saw me. That's the whole thing, really. That's the story if you strip it down to what it is. A man built a chair for a woman who died, and then a girl arrived who needed it, and the man was needed in the way he'd almost stopped hoping to be needed. And the girl, the woman, she was a woman. Whatever she looked like at first light on a fence post in November, the woman saw what he was. She still does. That's the part that doesn't stop. Some mornings I come in from the early feeding, and the house is still quiet, me's asleep. The stove's low, and Nora is in the south room in the chair in the morning light. She hears me come in and she turns and looks at me across the room with those dark level eyes, and the look is the same one from the first morning, measuring and taking account, except now there's nothing left to assess. She's made up her mind. She made up her mind in a field by a fence post, and she has not changed it since. I never in my life thought I'd earn that. I built a chair for a woman who was gone. A girl arrived and needed it. A man built things until he understood that what he was building toward had been there all along, waiting for him to be worth it. Or maybe he'd always been worth it. Maybe that's what she's been telling me all this time. I'm still deciding. But her hands say yes.